It is a prime ingredient that fuels the fires of imagination. Amid countless eons past, it fanned a spark ignited by a primeval author, chiseling arcane petroglyphs across a dim cave wall. This life-giving current once grew papyrus for paper and dried vibrant oils brushed over canvas. Carried across the land since before the dawn of time, it is the breath that gave rise to dinosaurs and has since walked on the surface of the moon. Manifesting as a placid breeze, it stirs memories of childhood, or as a turbulent vortex, ripping up the pages of history. Powered by this influence, we dream, love, laugh, hate, and destroy. In short, live out our lives. A gust of this disturbance carries the potential to scatter fog surrounding the unknown. Drifting through frequencies of time and space, thin air is inhaled for the first time and exhaled at the last. Don't try to catch your breath.
Journal entry, January 6th, 1863. Engaged the enemy this morning a little before dawn. Woke to the crackle of rifle fire from the skirmishers and to the strong smell of burnt powder in the stale air. A haze hung low over the ground like a great gray snake, twisting through the tall grass as the bugle called us to arms. All at once, the field exploded in a white wall of smoke as the enemy started to advance out of the tree line, rifles and cannons blazing. I stood up beside the soldiers in my regiment and returned fire. I remember thinking to myself as we ran into battle, how the whole scene seemed to be melting into one single image, frozen like a tin type on the mantel. Brother against brother, flint against steel, blue against gray, with blood red spilling in between. End of entry. And there it was, chronicled for posterity and as evidence of trespass, yet another barrage of carnage in the name of freedom, or perhaps the lack thereof. A play acted out on a stage facing both north and south. A singularly gruesome exchange of passionate shouting, followed up directly by echoing gunshots, hand-to-hand pantomime, and finally poignant sobbing and solo performances of pain, intermixed with tormented madness. Somewhere, interspersed between musket and cannon fire, I hear my commanding officer delivering his scripted lines. If and you don't fight like hell, you're not gonna have a country anymore. All the while thinking to myself that even if you play your part well, there'd be no raucous applause in the end, no cheers or standing ovations. Here, now, death was the only reward. If and not your own, then you live to fight and kill another day, and then another, and another after that. The storyline to this production is seemingly endless, save that which comes from a lead shot between the eyes, or maybe a dull bayonet through the heart. Still, the show must go on. all in the name of that elusive privilege we call freedom. Far too high a price, if you ask me. Sitting here now with my boots in the mud, blood, and gory entrails of my friends, neighbors, and countrymen, I decide for good and all to lay down my musket and simply turn and walk away. Deserter? I suppose so. Has an awful nasty ring to it. Now don't get me wrong. I ain't deserting the notion of freedom. No, ma'am. No, sir. I believe every man, woman, and child on the face of this here earth has the God-given right to live and breathe free. Thing of it is, you got to go on living and breathing so as to partake, and I ain't seeing too much hope of that lying cold dead next to me here in this riverbed. So, after plenty of turmoil and hand-wringing, I set off away from camp, away from old Mr. Death, before he come riding my way across the meadow, dressed in gray, with an outstretched scythe most folks call a bayonet. Off in the distance I hear a long roll calling the boys to assemble. I would not be present and accounted for. Private Ezekiel Ambrose, 43rd Illinois Infantry, dishonorably discharged by way of a shallow stream leading out of harm's way, and by none other than my own personal reconnoiter. Ain't carrying no furlough papers, that's a fact. Deserter? Copperhead? Nah, I ain't neither one. I reckon I'm now what some folks call a Parlour Soldier. I don't mind standing up for what's right, just as long as there's a chance in hell I might possibly remain standing when the smoke clears. The odds here are pretty slim. So, if it's all the same to you, I'd just as soon die another day.
In the annals of American Civil War phraseology, Parlour Soldier was a derogatory label applied to those defiant individuals who, when it came time for copious blood to be spilled, opted out and decided not to partake in the carnage, literally a soldier who was unfit for war, a poseur, simply put, not a true blue Billy Yank or a stone-cold gray Johnny Reb. Such would now be the given name for Ezekiel Ambrose, military man turned conscientious objector during that dark era of American history widely known as the War Between the States. It's a long, long way to Appomattox. Further still to Washington, D.C. Reasons notwithstanding, Mr. Ambrose is about to discover that some things really are worth fighting for. Just ahead, around the river bend, where the steady winds of change we call thin air continue to rage.
Now I figured I'd be foraging off the land on twigs, berries, and such for a few weeks on the way homeward. Too early to start fretting over those considerations anyhow. Right here and now, I was just a-traipsing down the middle of this here stream, sure as to keep any bloodhounds from tracking my scent. Irony of that being I'd most likely be hauled back to the fort and locked up in the brig for desertion. Superiors don't recognize the subtlety between Parlour Soldier and Yellow Belly, I reckon. Still, no musket shot whizzing past your head while you sit and wait for a guilty verdict, maybe a brand or a short dance off on an even shorter rope. Ah well, what's done is done, leastwise at this juncture. Even for so much as the prevalent raucous thunder of rifle and cannon, I still crept along at a snail's pace, careful not to kick up nary a splash for fear of drawing the beat of some outlying Confederate sniper hiding high up in the branches of a gnarly old persimmon tree. Ever wary of this lurking peril, real or imagined, I pressed on, musket at the ready. Out here in the middle of the creek bed, I was an easy target in a turkey shoot. Don't overthink things, Ambrose. Keep trudging upstream, home or the ever after, long as it's a call for a ceasefire. Up yonder a piece, round a sharp bend in the meandering rindle, I caught sight of what appeared to be some kind of fiercely intense source of concentrated light. Flickering and dancing across the tall reeds and shimmering like lavender candles rippling over the agitated surface of the flowing water. As I drew nearer, I could tell that the glow was being projected out from some kind of source close to eye level. Brilliant horizontal beams that lit up the fog-shrouded surroundings and coaxed a swarm of silently fluttering moths toward whatever fate lay ahead for all of us. Then, there it was, a gateway. In and of itself, nothing particularly ominous or fanciful, just a stone arch encrusted with lichen and tangled vines, spanning the stream to both banks and offering passage beyond through an intricately crafted grille of latticed wrought iron bars, separated down the middle and bolted to the stone structure by a corroded set of time-worn hinges. Beyond what I suppose would be considered these commonplace accoutrements, there was that eerie light. Swirling out into the distance and framed by the gate, I could plainly see the wispy tendrils of a glowing violet vortex, a strange billowing mass of turbulent vapor that seemed like a way ahead, though never in my life have I happened across anything so akin to the intangible or the outright witchy. Something that I'd have surely turned tail and ski-daddled from under normal circumstance. Then again, dodging musket shot and cannonballs ain't exactly normal circumstance. This here is akin to devil's work, I thought, conjuring stuff. Maybe a pathway forward into damnation. The gate itself stood ajar, open just a crack, wide enough for me to shimmy through, haversack and all. Almost like an invitation. This is a traverse. I heard tell about such things, wild tales told by the campfire, stories from soldiers already on perdition's road leading to madness, that state of mind that ain't neither north nor south, just somewhere they retreat to when they can no longer wrap their heads around everything they've seen. Maybe that's it for me. Descent into madness. End of the line after all. Well then, I decided, let's get on with it. Stepping peacefully into the afterlife without being run through by way of a thrusting bayonet? Yep, that'll do. The act of passing through, to traverse, seemed to me at least to be nothing more than an instant, a slight breath of air in my face, and in a wink of an eye, it was over. No choir cherubs, no minions of darkness. Nothing etheric at all, just a single step, one moment here, the next, surrounded by a mighty throng, an angry mob, not soldiers in blue, no graybacks neither, civilians, some toting colors for the Confederacy, others those of the Union. As for the latter, many defiantly flying the flag upside down, and bearing the markings of a strangely altered pseudo-reproduction, sewn together with the wrong sum of stars and stripes. Every last one, no doubt a treacherous Johnny Reb. As the entire circumstance became undeniably clear, I realized that I was no longer standing in a field or tromping down a creek bed meandering somewhere north of Manassas. This here weren't the Battle of Bull Run at all. This was unthinkable. A belligerent horde of men and women in the midst of storming the sacred ramparts of the United States Capitol in Washington, District of Columbia. As I watched on in utter disbelief, thousands of enraged citizens poured over the walls of this cherished landmark of democracy like ants, seemingly on course to dismantle the very institution that my friends and brothers were spilling their life's blood on the battlefield to uphold. If and I weren't seeing it all transpire with my own eyes peeled, I could have never imagined that the Confederacy was outfitted well enough to bring this conflagration to the Capitol steps. Waving my musket high overhead, I shouted, "Hold up now, don't go no further," like standing on the tracks and shouting stop to an oncoming train. My plea fell full out on deaf ears. Now, You all know I ain't no hero. Parlour Soldier, that's the label I stitched over them stripes on my uniform. Fall back, retreat, tuck tail, and run. Still, ain't no way I just gonna stand by all impartial like and let this play out. Here and now, I weren't just crouching in the mud and waiting to die. Outnumbered for sure, but I'll be damned if I ain't gonna act on this. I had to do something, leastwise I had to try. Driven onward by a dark, seething tide of outright anarchy, the crowds rushed forward more resolute in their actions than a cavalry charge, apparently so fixed on their mission that every last one of them overlooked my Billy Yank colors on the way by. Figuring I was serving no purpose just standing out here with my jaw dropped, I started for the Capitol steps myself, lost in an angry sea of humanity as our advance seemed to be wholly aimed toward the doors smack dab below the towering central dome. All around me in a tangled multitude of stampeding malcontents, I could hear them shouting things like, "Drag 'em out," and chanting, "We want Trump, we want Trump," whoever or whatever a Trump was. As the mayhem progressed, I noticed that many of the rioters were brandishing bright red flags reading, "Trump is our president." "Wait a minute," I shouted. "What's going on here? I don't understand. Where is President Lincoln? What have you done with President Abraham Lincoln?" One of the men in the crowd looked straight at me with unchecked anger in his eyes. Roughly placing his hands on my shoulders, he shouted,
"President Lincoln is dead, soldier boy. Ancient history. Now wake up and see what's going down. Join the fight to make America great again."
Seemingly satisfied that he'd imparted some sort of genuine pearl of wisdom, the man turned and plunged forward into the mass, close now to the shuttered doors leading into the rotunda. Somewhere close by, I could hear glass shattering, and I knew the awful truth, that these marauders had already breached the building. Amid the clashing fistfalls and flailing hand-to-hand melee up ahead, I could see a line of oddly uniformed constables holding a line against the advance. Clad all in black and sporting some sort of strange helmet equipped with a visor or smoke glass faceplate, the peace officers were hopelessly outnumbered, yet continued standing their ground as best they could, pushing back against the rush and valiantly defending the perimeter grounds. In the end, many were overrun and trampled underfoot as the unstoppable rioters boiled over a row of ineffective, makeshift metal barriers along the way. As the first of the rabble-rousers reached the unavailing glass doors, I could plainly see that there was only one constable on duty, and he wasn't wearing any of that there protective gear like the others, and so was easily pushed asunder. Caught in the raucous advance through the narrow opening, I was dragged inside with those leading the charge, still clinging to my musket, biding my time, saving a single shot for the moment when I might need it most. Several of the invaders shouted, "Occupy, do not destroy," on the way into the rotunda, yet I knew by the telltale crunching sound of broken glass underfoot that there was plenty of proof to the contrary. As utter mayhem ensued beneath the vaulted expanse of the Capitol dome, I started trying to push back some against the onslaught, enough that I managed to peel away to the reasonable calm of a nearby stairwell leading up and away from the procession as they fanned out into the room. Believed to have eluded the attackers, at least momentarily, I started up the stairs, but then paused directly when I saw that I was not alone in this apparent escape route. A lone woman was standing on the landing above me, obviously overburdened by two large boxes she was doing her best to stow away in the opposite direction of the fracas. Her look of terror was outright palpable as she glared down at me, sure as she was that I was of the intent to inflict harm upon her. "No, ma'am, wait," I exclaimed. "I didn't come here today with these marauders. I tell you true, my sympathies lie with those elected by the people. I mean you no harm." The woman paused.
"If that is true, sir,"
she shouted back,
"I implore you, please, Put your weapon there to good use and block passage to this exit until I am gone.
Glancing down at the sizable burden in her arms, she said,
These boxes, they contain the electoral votes such as they have been cast for the president and vice president. They must not fall into the wrong hands.
At that moment, I realized something, a notion that by way of her words put my mind at ease. I nodded. Go on. I'll keep you out of harm's way. What you got there in them boxes, that's worth fighting, even dying for. The woman smiled back at me.
Indeed it is,
She exclaimed.
and you're a fine soldier, sir, for saying so. Your bravery in the face of this madness is truly a selfless act. You stand at the ready for no less than the preservation of our democracy. In my book, that makes you a true hero. Thank you for your service, and please, try to keep safe.
You as well, ma'am, I replied, as I watched her make a swift retreat, taking the voice of the people with her to be counted and heard. The full import of her kind words started sinking in, and I suddenly realized I was an honest-to-God Billy Blue defender of freedom after all. Well, I'll be dogged. Here and now, I suppose, is that other day for which I spoke of back yonder a piece. I suppose you could say I was finally ready to lay down my life for the cause. That old Traverse spit me out on a far different field of battle, to be sure. Here, though, I figure I'm right ready to stand down this aggression before the damage is done all permanent-like. All things considered, turns out I weren't no parlor soldier in the end. No, ma'am. No, sir. I turned back to face the chaos then, rifle at the ready. Stand fast, I called out into the echoing chamber. This grievous act of insurrection must end, right here, right now. From somewhere far off in the distance, up the steps behind me, I heard a door get slammed shut and bolted on t'other side, and I knew that that was a promise kept. I stood fast against the onslaught, ready now to do what I must. I suppose so far as being perceived as a potential threat and all, I ain't that imposing. So far as physical stature, I never was much for intimidation, certainly not when you're this hopelessly surpassed by the head count. Be that as it may, I held up my weapon to the first set of stragglers what come marching my way, my toad stabber point nearly plucking out his Adam's apple, should necessity dictate. Showing nary a sign of backing down, my quarry quickly reached out and took hold of my gun barrel and pushed it aside like it was nothing.
What the hell are you supposed to be anyway, huh?
He chided.
Some kind of Yankee Doodle boy? You keep your little pop gun out of my face and run on back over to the Smithsonian where you belong. This here ain't no historical reenactment, Major Nuisance.
Gesturing to a group of men standing huddled close at hand, he said,
You see, me and my boys here, we build ourselves a gallows back out there on the lawn. Now you might say we going hunting for a VIP at our little necktie party. Yes, sir. Mr. Vice President's gonna be the guest of honor, and that's a fact.
Now, I already thought I'd bared witness to hatred on a grand scale. Seen the lengths to which human beings will strive to wipe one another off the face of the earth. Standing here now, listening to the rhetoric spewing out of this here fella, well, I reckon I come to realize there ain't no limits placed on how far a man will rise to the occasion in the name of hate. That's powerful medicine to clear your head when you're all at odds over a decision to stand and fight. Wrenching my gun back with a powerful yank, there was no time for him to loosen his grip afore my bayonet ran full hilt across his palm, slicing deep and leaving a ragged wound in its wake. Ain't no one gonna string up the Vice President nor any other heads of state today, mister. What you need to do is go on home now. Back down, go home, and think long and hard about your intentions. I've watched people a-fighting and a-dying to patch up what was wrong with this here system of government. What y'all are trying to do is tear it all down to the ground and stomp out the flame of democracy. With the tip of my blade hanging just shy of his face, and the receiving end of my smoke wagon staring him down on the wrong end of an itchy trigger finger, I said, "Go on, get that hand stitched up before I leave you lying on the ground, stone cold dead, with some permanent damage." Unmoving, with his arms in the air and his hand bleeding out like a stuck pig, my quarry looked left, then right, sizing up the situation. Cautiously, he took a deep breath in and then said,
"Okay, boys, change your plan. Looks like the VP ain't gonna be dancing the hemp fandango today after all. Back off a smidge. Give the yank a little breathing room. Come on now, get back."
The tussle was drawing an audience by now as folks started noticing I was blocking passage with intent to kill. Nervously, I backed away from what was fast becoming problematical, the group of 5 or 6 comrades promptly swelling into a force to reckon with.
"It's a damn shame, though,"
the ringleader said as he started dabbing his hand on the sleeve of his coat,
"that we come all this way, spent good, hard-earned money on lumber, nails, and rope. Sure seems like we still ought to put the gear to some good use."
As if on cue, 2 of the boys flanking me to either side reached out directly and grabbed me by the shoulders, while a third took a hold of my wrist, twisting it just enough that when I pulled the trigger on the musket, my shot projected out harmlessly overhead and smacked against the far wall, somewheres up high in the Capitol dome.
"Oops.
The fellow still squeezing my wrist said sharply,
I'm guessing that's your only slug, Yankee boy. Don't look like you're sporting a clip on that pretty old museum piece."
With that, the whole lot of them easily overpowered me and lifted me up straight away like a big sack of taters, hauling me back toward the door leading outside to the Capitol grounds. No idea what become of my weapon. Suppose they still reckoned that even though the powder was spent, I could still wield the blade with lethal prowess. I heard another gunshot ring out somewheres about as the lynch mob was a-toting me off, though I knew it couldn't be mine. Takes a smidge more time than that for a reload. Sadly, what it did signal was the echo of more bloodshed, commonplace on either end of that old traverse, I reckon. In my case, these bastards wanted themselves a martyr, and for their cause I figured I was already dressed in costume for the part. Don't recall much beyond that particular point, save what I perceived to be some kind of bright flash above me, as the mob pulled me a-kicking and a-hollering out the doorway. The rest of the story is all kinda disjointed-like. Creaking timber steps up to a lofted timber platform. Burlap sackcloth hood over my head. Thick, bristly strands of rope wrapped snug beneath my chin, tangled and a-tugging at my beard stubble. The sound of a trapdoor spring. A slight breath of air in my face, and in the wink of an eye, it was over. No choir of cherubs. No minions of darkness. Nothing etheric at all. Just a single step. One moment here, the next, no matter. For me, at least, the war was finally over.
Nothing more to say here, really, save to mention a slight discrepancy of historical significance. First, that the remains of Union Army Soldier Ezekiel Ambrose were recovered on the field of battle at Bull Run, strangely not deceased by way of artillery fire, but rather hanged by the neck until dead, most likely captured and lynched by Confederate forces gathered in the region of Manassas. That's the official story as it clearly states in the history books. However, advanced facial recognition software and cameras deployed in and around the United States Capitol before, during, and after the January 6th insurrection clearly show a man bearing striking resemblance to Ambrose being dragged out of a Capitol doorway, an oddly dressed Civil War hero who safeguarded the election process that day and sacrificed himself to protect the elected officials in charge. Couldn't happen, you say? Fair enough. Eyewitness accounts confirm that the gallows erected on the Capitol grounds was a threat constructed but never used. That is, unless the evidence of execution were to have been somehow erased, omitted for reasons of national security, and swept away into thin air. Episode 15 of the Thin Air podcast anthology, The Parlour Soldier, or Dead to Rights, was written, produced, directed, narrated, and told by R.J. Lonsdale. The voice of Ezekiel Ambrose was performed by Wild Bill TikTok, and the voices of the insurrectionists were performed by R.J. Lonsdale. Audio production for this Thin Air episode by R.J. Lonsdale of Flyby Studios. Music compositions used in this episode include Mysterious from Exorp Music and Regimented Instinct Percussion from Techno Axe Music, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 3.0. This has been an R.J. Lonsdale Flyby Studios presentation.